Hey guys, welcome to your first video lecture for mobile design. So for this lecture we're going to be talking about responsive images. So images are a really big part of the web. Of course we have to be able to know how to use them and how to modify them and how to make sure they appear the way we want them to appear. So we're going to talk about that today. So when we're talking about images, there's a bunch of different formats that we can use to put on the web. The most common that you're going to find that browsers actually support are going to be JPEG, PNG, GIF, SVG, and BMP. So JPEG is pretty common. You're going to find that in quite a few places. Usually when you're saving a file online, it's probably going to be in a JPEG or a PNG format. So JPEG is great for still images, photography, or images with complex colors. So it also allows you to compress your file, so you can use heavy compression, or you can have no compression. You get 100% of that data in your photo. Generally about 60 to 70% compression for a JPEG file will shrink your file considerably, like the size of your file, but it'll keep it looking pretty good on most screens. One thing to note with your JPEG files is that they don't preserve transparency. So that's important when you're talking about icons, when you're talking about logos, or anything where you need a transparent background. JPEG's not a good option for that. But it's great for photography, it's great for still images, and stuff like that. Now, the next one I talked about was PNG. So PNG is a newer file format than GIF or JPEG. It stands for Portable Network Graphics, and it's like a marriage between the GIF and a JPEG. So it's great for web graphics that require transparency because you can have a transparent background. It's color heavy, so it has more colors than JPEG in general. So it's a little bit better for complex photography and graphics. Now the PNG files are typically going to be quite a bit bigger than your JPEG files, so keep that in mind. And images that require re-editing or re-exporting, those are good for using PNGs. Now the GIF format, GIF or GIF, however you want to say it, is great for simple animations because of course it can have motion inside of it. We see it for a lot of little animations online. It's also good for small icons with transparent backgrounds because it does have that transparency. And then it's great for graphics with low pixel-to-pixel variation, like things that have a lot of flat color. This can work for logos and flags and stuff like that. So the last format I'm going to talk about is SVG. This stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. This is a really cool format for things like logos, icons, things with these strong geometric vector-friendly designs. So remember, vector graphics are things that we create in Illustrator or in Sketch using the pen tool or shape tools. They're graphics that are based on mathematical formulas. It allows us to scale our shape or our image and not lose any quality. So SVG is something you can save outside of Illustrator. You'll find it for some logos, you'll find it for some different file types, but it's considerably more rare to find online, even though it's probably arguably the best format. If you can get something in SVG, it's probably a good idea to export it in SVG. So in addition to these logos, these icons, or these strong geometric forms, graphics that need to be displayed in multiple sizes and screens are a great option for SVG. Graphics that respond to devices, so as your device screen sizes are changing, SVGs are a really powerful tool there. When I showed you guys that website, our responsive logos website, let me just bring that up here. This would be a great candidate for using an SVG. Now here we're clearly swapping out our image to a smaller image as our viewport's resizing. We're going to look at how to do this in a second. So again, really between JPEG and PNG, it's kind of up to you which one you want to choose. again, PNG is going to be bigger, and when we're talking about the web, we always want to make sure our image files are as small as they can be to reduce loading times. Loading times is so important when we're talking about the web. The GIF is great for these kind of motion animation situations, or for small icons or small things that don't have a lot of variation. And then of course SVG is probably the most versatile format, in that if you have something that is shape based, that is a vector based image, it allows us to put it in a bunch of different situations and allow it to respond really easily. So how do we handle images? Like, how do we actually make images responsive? So we know that when we just put an image on a site, well, let's take a look at that. So I'm just going to bring up brackets here, set up a new file. I'm just going to save this, throw it on my desktop, and clear this stuff out here. Okay, so I'm going to load up my website in a browser here. So obviously right now there's nothing on it, but if we write one, hey, double check that it works. I'm also going to create a CSS file. And link it to this file so we can look at some different image properties. So let's set our tag, we'll add the relationship, style sheet, our href, main CSS, and the type text CSS. Okay, so we have our link here. Let me just set up a horizontal split here. Okay, so I have my main CSS file down here. So I'm just going to double check that this is working properly. Using one of my favorite tests here, we can change the background to tomato, so we know that our CSS is hooked up correctly. Okay, so I'm just going to add an image into this file here. So our image tag, if we actually just look at it, it's just img. We've used it quite a bit, and the most popular attribute that we know of is source, so src. And this is where we provide the path to our image, whether the image is somewhere on our server or is that another. We could put a URL in here, we could put a local path. In this case, we're actually going to put a local path to this image right here, Candice Picard full. And it's actually just going to load in our image. So this is the full size image that it just loaded in. There's no modifications to it, loaded in the image. We don't have any CSS or anything. Of course, this is not a responsive image, because if we resize the screen, nothing happens. It's going to remain the same size there. So the image tag, the one we're most used to using is source, right? We can set this to a local path or a URL. Now there's other attributes we can add to our image tag. So this one you're probably used to seeing. This one's actually really important for any website that's going to be using a reader. They commonly look at these, so if someone's visually impaired and they can't see the images on the screen, it's going to use your alt tag. It's going to rely on that to sort of describe the page to them. So always make sure you're writing good alt text in here. So we could say woman in yellow. In yellow shirt, laughing. You can get as descriptive as you want there. So see, we're used to seeing these two tags here, but there's some other interesting tags we can add. For example, border. It's going to default to a black border here. So this takes a pixel value. We can also set the height. So we set the height to 100 pixels. It's going to maintain its aspect ratio. I'm going to take up the border. So 100 pixel height there. I'm going to change this to 200 pixels. Can get a little bit bigger. 400 pixels. Can be a little bit bigger. Now we can also change the width. Make sure we have our quotes around here. And got to get my mind out of CSS. So we change the width to 100. So when you define either the width or the height by themselves, you're going to be able to maintain your aspect ratio. So the aspect ratio is just the normal shape of the image. When you go outside of your aspect ratio and you keep all the data in the photo, you're going to get this kind of warped effect that we saw when we had height applied here. So essentially it's trying to obey both things. It's saying, okay, I have to be 400 pixels high and I have to be 100 pixels wide. So it's condensing our image here. It's kind of squishing it. So the reason these attributes exist on the image tag is just because of the way image was implemented. It's actually a very, very old element. It's been around for a long time, kind of even before it was pre-CSS days. So there weren't many ways we could modify a web page, and that's why web pages look super basic. But we could do some super basic things to images. For example, set their width and height. We could add a border around them. We want to avoid as much as possible defining our width and height like this inside of our image. Part of the reason why is it gives us very little control over what happens when the screen changes size. Because the only way to go in and make changes here is to try to override it with CSS, which can have some strange effects, or to use JavaScript and to plug in different values as the screen size changes. So JavaScript is just going to be more process intensive than a media query, for example, which has is basically a lighter way of actually doing this. The other thing here is we want to keep as much about our presentation out of our HTML, because really we want to look in one place for anything related to presentation. It should be our CSS. Content we can keep inside our HTML. So this is important, right? What the actual image content is. This alt text here is important because it's actual providing content to the screen, whereas our CSS is describing what the content is going to look like. And JavaScript should be describing how that content is going to behave on the screen or interact with other pieces of content or information. So we do want to avoid using pretty much anything other than our source attribute and our alt attribute for images. So I'm just going to bring it back to the way it was before. So let's take a look at the different approaches we can take to making images responsive. So there's 3 common approaches to making your images work on a responsive website. So the first is to swap out your images using CSS, which we're going to see in a second. The second is using the same image for both mobile, desktop, tablet, right? Using the same image and just cropping that image as the screen size changes. And the third approach is using the picture element in source set, which we'll go through. The first one we're going to go through is swapping images using CSS. So we have our image here, and we're going to use media queries and one of our display options in this example. So what I'm going to do here is essentially what I want to do here is I want to change this picture and crop it so that I just see her head when it goes down to a mobile layout. So at about 400 pixels, or about this size right here. So I actually have an image already saved called Chemist Picard Small. And it's just a smaller version of this, right? It's a cropped version of this picture. So right now I have both images loaded into my file. If I actually pull out like this, they're going to sit beside each other, because images, this is something I forgot to mention, images are inline by default, which means they're going to be treated like text. So they sit on a baseline and they'll fall in beside each other if there's available space, kind of like a floating element. So this first method here, using CSS to swap, it's going to rely on media queries. So essentially we're going to set up a media query for our desktop. So we're going to go media, screen, and min width 600 pixels. So we're going to say if the screen is bigger than 600 pixels, apply this style. And just to see that this media query is working, we'll set a background here. We can see now that our media query is working. So when we go to mobile, that background color is going to go away. Again, this is a mobile first approach. So essentially we are assuming that the phone is going to be the most preferred device. It's going to be the device that's visited the most. So we're setting up this media query to handle a situation where you're not on a phone, where you're on a desktop. By saying anything above 600 pixels, we're going to apply this. So now to make our changes with our images to do our swapping. So what we're going to do here is, before we do anything inside of our media query, we are going to give our images an ID. So we'll give this one image small. We'll actually call it pic, just to make sure image does not, that keyword doesn't collide with anything. Use the word pic instead. So let's apply a style to pic full. And what we're going to do is we're going to set display none in this image. So that's going to hide that bigger full-sized image. So it's going to show our preferred mobile image here. What we're going to do inside of our media query, so we're going to say what's on desktop. We don't want to see this mobile one, we want to see the full-sized image. So we're going to look at our ID here, pick small. We're going to go display none. So we're telling this to hide the small image when we go over 600 pixels. And we want to show our full picture. So we'll go display block. Now when we resize, let's go to hide the small one. Here it's hiding the small one, showing the big one. Here, showing the small one, hiding the big one. So there's a huge drawback to this approach, and this was an approach that a lot of people used to take before there were better methods for handling responsive images. This approach requires you to download every single image. So if we were doing something for tablet, if we were doing something for a smaller screen, if we had multiple different pictures here, even with just two, we're downloading an extra picture when we might not necessarily need it, right? We might not even need it. If someone loads the device on their mobile phone, they never go onto desktop, we made them load a whole image for no reason. When we're working on the web, especially with images, we want to make sure images are optimized, that there's a balance between quality and size, so they're not taking too long to download. But we always want to reduce the amount of actual images that we're requesting. Luckily, there's a bunch of ways to do that, but this approach does not have that benefit. So let's look at another approach here. So we can actually not even swap images at all. We can try using the same image for both our mobile and desktop and just crop that image. So let's go back here. I'm going to leave it on full here. And I'm going to delete our media query. So we're back to square one with our image. And what we're going to do here is we're going to use something called the picture fit. So this is something you may not have used before, but it's kind of a cool little feature of CSS. So we have an ID here on picfull, so I'm going to go picfull just to select that. And what I'm going to do is set the width of this to 50%. It's going to be 50% of our body, which is the parent element of this image. So you can see here that the height is changing here. So I'm going to actually cap out the height here. So we'll say 40 rem. you can see that it's causing it to stretch a little bit. So the reason why I did that, I just wanted to show you that unless you know exactly the height of your image, you know the exact proportions, then don't do something like this, because it's going to stretch, and people can definitely tell when it's stretched. Even in this case, maybe you didn't see the original image, but you can definitely tell, your eye can tell whether it's consciously or not that something's wrong with this photo. So in this case, let me set the height to 40 rem. Let me set the width to 10 pixels. So essentially what we have here is a photo that's very, very squished. So let's set it to 30 pixels, still very squished. What we can do is we can provide this special property here, and it's called, so we're going to add this property called object fit. And object fit is going to give us a couple different options here. So we're actually going to choose cover, and what this is going to do is it's going to maintain the image's aspect ratio, and it's going to hide parts of the image that don't fit inside these constraints. So it allows you to resize your browser and still have a pretty responsive image, right? We're just cutting out these different parts, but our actual image is staying the same size. Now, the drawback to this, and one of the biggest drawbacks to this, is if you have a photo where your image is not in the center, object fit doesn't work that well, or sorry, where your subject is not in the center. So every photo typically has a subject, an area of focus, which is the most important part of the photo. In this case, our subject is this lady in the photo, and luckily she's right in the middle of our photo. So this property here kind of works on almost every level. So when we're resizing the screen, but when we get to this point here, you can see she's still kind of in the center of the screen. But imagine if she was a little bit over to the right. I'm sure you've seen images where people are sitting kind of off to the side, or there's something that's in focus in the image and it's kind of out of the way a little bit. Object fit really only works when your subject is in the middle of the photo. The other thing it does is it makes you load the whole image. So it's actually making you load unnecessary parts of the image here, right? Like, why load this extra part if we're never going to see it? You know, there could be a huge portion beneath here that we're just not seeing, and we're using that data to actually load that image in. Now the other thing about this is when we load in an image with parts that we don't need, it's putting this unnecessary strain on our site, right? And imagine if we had 50 different pictures that were using this and they were loading this extra part that people aren't going to see. I mean, it's definitely better than our first solution of swapping the CSS, because we were just loading full images into the site that we weren't necessarily going to use. But this doesn't provide a much bigger benefit there. So we've looked at the swap out method, and we've looked at the one image cropping using object fit, which of course can lead to an issue like this where a good portion of a subject is cut out. And now we're going to go into the most commonly used approach to responsive images, and it's called the picture element. So the picture element is kind of combines the benefits of both of the things we just looked at, and it allows you to have quite a bit more control over what parts of your images appear on different screen sizes, and also how those images look. So the biggest benefits of this is that it allows for you to use different image sources, and the first source that fits the preferences is the one that's downloaded. So we can actually provide our page with multiple different images for different screen sizes, multiple different variations of the same image for different screen sizes, and it will only download the one that makes sense to download at the time, instead of downloading every single one, or downloading one big image and then cropping out just a small piece of it. Okay, so when we're thinking about responsive images, one thing we want to think about is resolution. We don't want to load really high resolution photos on a screen that has a low resolution. because essentially what's going to happen is it has to take all those pixels and downscale them. It has to turn essentially sometimes 9 pixels or more into 1 pixel. So there's a lot of processing power that goes into that, and oftentimes what happens is you get this kind of blurry effect, or an image has these little glitchy areas in it, depending on the device that's doing the downscaling. The opposite is also true. We don't want to provide a low resolution photo to a device with a high resolution, like a Retina Display Mac or a really high resolution phone, because what's going to happen is it's going to take those pixels and try to upscale them. So it's going to try to take the pixels inside your image and try to turn that 1 pixel into, for example, 4 pixels if it's a 2x display, or 9 pixels if it's a 3x display. That's going to give it a really kind of blurry effect on a lot of key areas in your picture. So what I have here is a picture, the same picture, side by side by side, and probably in the video it's going to look pretty similar. They're almost going to look exactly the same. So what I want you to do is I want you to open the file. I've included it in Blackboard, and I want you to look at these 3 photos and see if you can see a difference between the 3. So if you haven't looked yet and you just want to skip right to the answer here, we can sort of dive in here. So this image on the left here is a lower resolution picture. So my screen here is actually a Retina display. So essentially what's happening here is for every 1 pixel inside of my image, it's going to be converted or doubled into 4 pixels. So when I want something to look perfect on my Retina display monitor, I have to provide double the amount of pixels, because essentially I don't want it to have to upscale and multiply every pixel I have and turn every pixel I have into 4, when I could just give it a photo that already has those 4 pixels there, that already has the more pixels there. So this one right here is what's called a 1-to-1 ratio. So this photo, let me just double check the size here. So this photo is 1000 by 1501 pixels. So this is a 1x image. So the idea here is that every photo pixel is going to match up to 1 hardware pixel. Of course, we know that's not the case, because on a Retina display there's double the amount of pixels, so it has to upscale. So this one is particularly in these areas here, these detailed areas, like around the window here, especially around this area here, you're going to get this kind of blurry effect because it's doing the upscaling. This one here is going to give you the perfect kind of match because it's pretty close to the pixel ratio. This is actually 2x, so this is a 2000 by 3002 pixel image. So it's double the image here. It's double the resolution. This one is triple the resolution. And the issue here is because I have a Retina display, which is a 2x display, this one has to downscale. So although the difference between this and this isn't as noticeable, you can still kind of see some areas here where it's a little blurry because the processor is doing its upscaling. So as much as possible, you want to provide different versions of an image or different resolutions of an image depending on the screen's pixel ratio. So now that we've looked at our resolution considerations, we can actually set this up here to compensate for the different resolutions. So if we go into our image here, we have our attribute source. Now we can actually provide another attribute which we haven't looked at, and it's called source set. So what source set is going to do is you're going to provide your different images here, your different sources. So really our other source here for this image is going to be, really, let's go and change this image up. So we're using our 3 different resolution images here. So I'm going to change the source here, do building, 1000 times 1 at 1x.png. Okay, so this has loaded in our image here for us. Now, what we can do is we can provide different sources for different screen resolutions, so we can load in different versions of this image based on the screen resolution. So what we could do is we can provide the source and then sort of the argument or the query that needs to be fulfilled for this image to be swapped in. So let's go to our, so we'll say that this one here is great for a 1x screen. We can type a comma. We can say building, and we want to keep that. So we'll say building 2000 by this is great for a 2x screen. And building 3x is great for a 3x screen. Close that. So essentially what this is going to do is going to allow the computer to do some of the thinking, or the browser to do some of the thinking. So when it loads this up, it's going to load whatever image best suits its environment. So if it's loading it on a standard resolution screen, or a resolution where one CSX pixel actually equals one hardware pixel, which is pretty rare now, it's going to load in our lower resolution image. It's on a 2x display, which is the most common. It's going to load in this image. And again, it's not downloading all three of these. It's only downloading the one it needs. So it's looking at the considerations or the type of device it's on, or the characteristics of the device, and then it's going to download the image that makes the most sense here. So one thing you have to keep in mind with pixel ratios is that almost every device on the market is going to have a different pixel ratio. So some might have like 2.25x, some might have 2.56x, some might have 1.75. So it's this range of screen or pixel ratios. So these are kind of restrictive in some way, right? If we're saying 2x, we're kind of saying, you know, if it's exactly 2x, we're going to launch this image. So we can make some improvements here by using this width value. So what we can do is we can actually tell the browser how wide our image is. So in this case, our image is 1000. So instead of putting pixels here, and this is the only place in HTML where you actually use this value right here, we actually type in W, and W just means pixels. So we'll do that, and we'll do that. So we're just saying this is 1000 pixels wide, this is 2000 pixels wide, and this is 3000 pixels wide. So this is going to have the same effect here, except we're just getting more fine-tuned control because we're allowing the browser to sort of make some decisions for us here without being so strict. There's even another level of improvement that we can make that actually makes an even bigger improvement in terms of how much control we have over our images. So instead of using source set, like we were using here, sorry, that should have been source set in the previous examples and not source, we can use something called the picture element. So picture element has an opening and closing tag, looks like this. We're actually going to close right here, so we're going to have our image inside of here. So I'm actually going to change this back to the canvas background full, so this will come up. And inside of here we can provide different sources, but we can actually use media queries to look at the size of the viewport and look at other characteristics of the environment and swap in different images here. So we use this tag called source, and we provide a media query here. So at this point we're going to say min width. So we'll say the min width is 600 pixels. So if it's over 600 pixels, we are going to provide a different image here. So we're going to provide, in this case, we'll do canvas card full.png. for our other source, we can set something like max width 599 pixels, and the source set here, we can put in Candice Picard small PNG. When we set up our picture tag here, we provide different sources here. Inside here we add our media query. So just like we normally do a media query, we can write a media query in here. And then under the source set attribute, we provide the image that we're going to want swapped in or downloaded if this condition is true. So if the screen is over 500 pixels, the viewport's over 500 pixels, we're going to use this image here. Only if we drop under 499 pixels or under 500 pixels are we going to download the small image here. This one right here is a fallback in case a browser doesn't recognize what picture is, but this is pretty uncommon now. Basically every major browser is going to recognize the picture element now. So there's big benefits here. I think the biggest benefit is we're only downloading images we absolutely need to download. So if someone were to load this on a mobile device, they would only ever download the small version of this image. They wouldn't need to download the full version. If I did resize my viewport, it would download the full version, and now it would have both of those files to swap between. But again, I'm only getting that bigger picture if it's absolutely necessary. So the other thing I'll say about images is when you're selecting images for your site, there's a couple things you want to make sure that your images have. So when you're deciding on the mood or the style of your site or the color scheme, you want to make sure you find a photo that is in harmony with that. So if your site is mostly yellow, you can look for photos that have blue tones in them, or things that are going to be complementary, or other yellow tones so they're analogous and they match better. There's some color theory in there. There's also the mood of your site. So if you have an upbeat site, you want to get pictures of people, of upbeat people or of upbeat scenarios. You don't want to change the mood of the site by putting in an image that really doesn't make sense, that doesn't fit. The other thing you want to look for as much as possible is high resolution images, because they allow you to do things like we just did with picture, which is provide different resolution images into a document in different scenarios. When we start with high resolution, even if we're not going to use that main high resolution image, it allows us to resize that image because we have the data in the picture, right? When pictures are higher resolution, they have more data, which means it's easier to make them smaller. If you start with a small image with less data and you try to resize it, it's not going to look good. Okay, so for our assignment for this week, what I want you guys to do is take your assignment from last week, our travel website, and what I want you to do is modify that website to use a media query. What I want you to do is switch that from that 2-column layout to a 1-column layout using your media query. The breakpoint there can be around 400 pixels or 500 pixels. You could pick either one of those values there. And what I want to see is your images that you use in your site use the picture element. So I want you to swap to more mobile friendly versions of your pictures when you go to that 1-column layout. Now, if you don't have a lot of images in your site, what I want each of your sites to have is now I want them to have at least 3 images. So if you only added 1 image when you did your site, add 2 more images and add some more content so that makes sense in the layout. And then when you resize, change those images similar to how I did with in my example here, where I cut part of the image out, I lowered the resolution of that image. Try to do a similar thing so you're taking advantage of those capabilities in picture. What we want to make sure is on mobile that we're not taking up unnecessary space with the picture. So if you can shrink a picture down in some kind of way, that's really beneficial. So that assignment's going to be due when I get back from my vacation. We're still going to have a lab to go through it if you guys have any questions. In terms of the creative aspects of it, make sure you have those 3 pictures, at least 3 pictures. Make sure you're using the picture element, and stick with the same location you used last time. So fit it into the theme of the site you used last time, just to save you guys some time there.